Back on GameDaySportsRadio.com Friday morning. Mike Bernard with us to discuss a little college football this weekend. Mike, how are you doing this early Friday morning?
Doing great, Coach. I, as always, like to be on Inside the Numbers. Got 3 games to go over today. First one is we're going to look at Alabama Ole Miss to start.
Yeah, early on, this game was really kind of viewed as it could be a de facto championship game for the SEC West. But now, Bama can only play the spoiler in this game. Um, you think about it, a win is going to pretty much send an Alabama win will pretty much send LSU to Atlanta. But you got Ole Miss rested, coming off an open date. My big question is, how much gas does the Tide have left in the tank after Baton Rouge? That was a very physical game. Greg McElroy, former Alabama quarterback, ESPN analyst, says this football program isn't where it once was. At the players down there right now, a lot of them feel entitled to win. And that kind of ruffled a few feathers down in Tuscaloosa.
Well, he's right. And, Coach, to show how the SEC has closed the gap on Alabama, the difference in domination, basically, Alabama's last 17 conference games, 10 of those were decided by one score. The previous 54 SEC games, only 10 were decided by one score in that 54-game span. So that's irrefutable there. Saturday, first time in 11 years that Alabama will be playing a regular season game without a legitimate chance to play for either the BCS or the college football playoff. Some will say 2019 they were in that situation, but I disagree because they only had one loss before that 2019 Auburn game, and they were still in the running for an at-large bid that year. The last time Alabama had 2 regular season losses with regular season games remaining left on the schedule, 2010. Alabama lost to South Carolina in October of that year, LSU the first week of November, and they again lost in the Iron Bowl for their third loss. And, Coach, so I agree with McElroy. It's not a knock because that high level simply cannot be sustained indefinitely. But Saban's managed to do it for nearly 15 years.
Yeah, and one thing, McElroy, obviously the Alabama program, you're sitting there and they're probably going to end up winning 10 games no matter what at the end of the year. And you've reached a level of excellence when you can say, oh, we have 10 wins, oh, it's a down year. But,
Clemson, sorry, Coach, but Clemson last year, they win 10 games and they're just everyone's like ready to fire Dabo.
Exactly. But from McElroy's standpoint, obviously he's stating the obvious. But, I'm wondering if he's also trying to light a little bit of fire down in Tuscaloosa because, Coach Saban, he loves rat poison, as he says, because he's able to turn that and use that as motivation. And back in my coaching days, I would give friendly reporters hints about things that I wanted them to say. And for folks in the South, if they can remember back 8 or 20 years, Coach Pat Dye, back in 2002 on the radio, the week of the Georgia-Alabama game, on radio in Birmingham, Atlanta, all over the Southeast, Coach Dye says, Georgia's not man enough to play with Alabama. Now, again, Coach Dye played at Georgia. He coached as an assistant under Coach Bryant at Alabama, and then, of course, head coach at Auburn. But Georgia's offensive line coach that year, Neil Callaway, of course, played and coached under Coach Dye. And by the way, the end of that game was 27-25 over Alabama. And that little quote from Coach Dye, it was all over the Georgia locker room. I know that for a fact because I saw it. So don't think that Greg McElroy's statements aren't being bounced around the locker room in Tuscaloosa. But one thing about Lane Kiffin, he is not falling into his, get your popcorn show like last year.
Get your popcorn ready.
get your popcorn ready. Last year the Rebels were number 12. Bama was number 1. It was 42-21 Bama. It was 35-0 before Ole Miss could even crack the scoreboard. This year, it's Ole Miss number 11, Bama number 9, and nothing but sugar coming out of that Ole Miss camp. Accolades aplenty for the Bama program, and particularly for Saban, who Kiffin calls the GOAT. Regardless of this outcome, Kiffin has shown that he has grown up and learned even more because he's not poking at the wounded bear.
Yeah, but they haven't kicked off yet. So it's even money that Kiffin's going to, start yapping again. He's going to provide some bulletin board material. I'd say even money is the price on that. Alabama's a 12-point favorite on the road. And, Coach, Alabama, we talked about all the great things they've accomplished, but they do not cover on the road. They're just 2-6 against the number their last 8 road games. They're laying another big number in Oxford Saturday. And when Alabama is favored by 14 or less on the road, the last 4 times, they're 0 for 4. Listen, names, faces, players, coaches at Ole Miss have changed, but that program is not afraid of this moment. They beat Alabama in 2014. That Alabama team went on to the Final Four. They beat Alabama the very next year in 2015. That Alabama team went on to win it all. I lean to Ole Miss plus the points here as a small play.
Hey, I'm going to take your even money on Lane. I think he keeps his mouth shut at least until after the game.
Maybe so, but history. If history repeats itself, he will talk.
I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, Mike. Come on. All right, let's move on to TCU at Texas. This is a respect game for TCU. They thought they should have been ranked higher in the first rankings, and now they're ranked number 4. And they're going to play Texas at Texas. And Texas, the Longhorns, only 6-3. But, you think about it. It's weird. I'm ranked number 4 in the country, but yet a 6-3 team is favored over me at home. But the crazy thing is if the Hogs, if they win out, they'll probably make the college football playoffs. As far as this series, TCU's won 7 of the last 10. They split the last 4. First time that the Frogs have been 9-0 since 2010 when they beat Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl to go 13-0. Of course, Auburn won the national championship that year. I think this is a huge game for Sark. If he can knock off number 4 TCU, he kind of shows the fan base that the Oklahoma game wasn't an anomaly because Texas has lacked consistency since Mac Brown. They have a great win, then they follow it up with a head scratcher. But, of course, this should be the show of the quarterbacks, Max Duggan and Quinn Ewers. They should be the focal point in this game. And whichever one plays the best, it's going to give his team the best chance to win. But I think this is going to come down to defense. Which defense is going to step up? I think the secret weapon in this is Gary Patterson, 24 years at TCU, 20 of those as head coach, and now he's special assistant to the head coach at the University of Texas. Well, he knows that TCU program inside and out. He's very familiar with Sonny Dykes. And you talk about the pressure of November all the time, Mike, and I certainly believe in it. Well, I'm looking across the plains, and I see TCU sweating a little bit.
The pressure of November has created chaos every year since at least 2007. That year, West Virginia lost as a 28-point favorite to Pitt. That allowed a 2-loss LSU team to play and win the BCS title. And it happens every year. There's countless instances, and sometimes multiple times per year. TCU's number 4, Texas, you mentioned they have 3 losses. Longhorns are favored by 7 to 8 points. Remember, this is not uncommon. Just last week, we had number 3, Georgia, a 9-point favorite over number 1, Tennessee. We saw the Bulldogs had their way with the Vols. Polls and rankings are just that, but the odds makers know better. Horned Frogs, they're getting more respect from the committee than they are the odds makers. Texas laying 7, 7.5, even a couple of 8s out there. public is all over TCU, very similar to the public's love of Tennessee last Saturday. Normally, I advise people to stay away from the public teams like Tennessee last week. But hey, you can't argue with TCU's spread record. They're 7-1-1 against the spread. No one's better in all 131 teams. In my opinion, though, I think the Frogs lose at least 2 games because they have a tough closing schedule. They're at Texas. They're at Baylor. And Iowa State, even though they underperform every year, Matt Campbell gets handed preseason coach of the millennium every year, and then they lose too many games. I think he's a fine coach, but this is a spot for it. That's a spot where, I mean, TCU could be looking at their second or third loss against, a Cyclones team. But maybe this Horned Frog team keeps it going in Austin. They're 7-1-1 against the spread, so they're outperforming the market.
Yeah, and I think that the committee, and again, they're going to say otherwise, and I wouldn't expect anything less. But I believe that they stuck TCU right here at number 4, saying, okay, win out, and yeah, you'll get in, knowing that, they're not going to get out, but they can't say we didn't get the respect because they're sitting there and they can punch their own ticket right now.
Well, remember 2014, they were sitting there, right? And they won out and they got dropped back.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't even bank on that because that year that was Texas, TCU and Baylor claiming, oh, we're co-champions because they had done away with the title game and it didn't work. But the reason it didn't work, it wasn't a slap on the conference. It wasn't any unfounded bias. It's because both of those teams that year had horrendous preseason games. Right. I mean, they're playing the worst of 1AAs back then, and no Power 5 conferences. So anyway, I don't think it's going to be an issue this year because TCU is going to lose.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you and I, we're just wasting tape talking about that. Because
we're good at that.
Yeah, we're good at that. But it's not going to surprise me to see them have 2 or 3 losses. All right, let's move on to Texas A&M at Auburn. Now, this is a game that we never thought would lay out as it has this week. Both teams 3-6. One of them has to win out to secure a bowl spot, and I really don't see either one of them going to a bowl unless they slip in on that 5-7 rule if they can't get enough teams or what have you. But
Texas A&M would quit anyway.
Probably so. They'd opt out. That's exactly right. The plane would break down. Speaking of that, this year, the accusations of strictly buying a recruiting class, inexplicable losses, locker room incidences, injuries, flu outbreak last week. You and I are old enough to remember the old Saturday Night Live with Rosanna Dana. That's always something. And this week, Texas A&M got another hit. Anthony Hill Jr., the number 2 linebacker in the country, decommits from the Aggies.
They didn't give him enough money, I guess. I mean, seriously, if you're a top commit and you see all this turmoil and chaos and, they're in disarray over there. And there's talks of Jimbo getting bought out. So that doesn't surprise me. They had I believe most services ranked their recruiting class number 1 last year, and they've got 6 losses. So,
yeah. Well, hey, this Auburn team, talking about dysfunction. Listen, this Auburn team, we were on the Brian Harsin death watch from the week of Penn State, really. As soon as they lost their first game, it was on, and it was on hard. And we knew that it was coming. And, of course, both you and I know that Brian Harsin's a good coach. It was just he's a terrible fit for Auburn University. And but the Tigers last week under Cadillac Williams in his interim role, they played with a lot of passion. They did lose 39-33 in overtime. But what I liked about this Auburn team was after they fell behind by 20-some-odd points, they actually fought back to take the lead. And that didn't happen under Harsin. Whatever Auburn was getting at halftime was pretty much what Auburn was getting under Brian Harsin. They lost double-digit leads time and time again in the second half. Now, I know Cadillac's not the long-term answer for head coach at Auburn University, but he's what they need right now. He's an Auburn man from the word go. He's a very good coach, very good coach. And the new coach, whoever the new head coach is, he better keep him around because he's a great recruiter, great ambassador, and there's no one more loyal to Auburn than Cadillac Williams. This Auburn team, Mike, not overly talented at all. You look at their offensive and defensive line especially, and they're not close to what you need to win in the SEC. All the time we talk about in coaching who wants it more, and really a lot of the time that's just coach speak that we throw out there. But Mike, as I look at this game, that's what it really may come down to is who wants it more.
Yeah, and I agree. And talking about Cadillac Williams, he was on that 04 Auburn team, but you brought up the offensive and defensive lines, and you look at Auburn's 2010 championship team, the 2013 team that played for the title, the 2017 team was probably better than both of those, and they ended up with 4 losses. They just had an unbelievable schedule, having to play at Clemson and play number 1 3 consecutive weeks in a row, and then a meaningless bowl game against UCF.
Yeah, and beat number 1 twice. Beat number
exactly.
1 back-to-back twice.
Right. And as we've seen, when you have those elite matchups, the team that lost the first game comes back and won every time. 2011, last year, Georgia and Alabama. So, but the point I was going to make is that 2017 team, offensive line was outstanding, right? Defensive line was very good as well. But the 2010 team, all the attention was on Cam Newton and the running back from Arkansas escapes me, but had a lot of good players, the skill players, but it was the defensive line, Fairley, and that defensive line that blew up Oregon. Oregon was averaging 300 rush yards per game, and they got stomped, right? They didn't get stomped on the scoreboard. Auburn won and covered, but physically, that's what they did. And you're right. You don't see that right now. And I think, and I'm not suggesting Coach O go over there, but maybe he's got enough money where he could just fish the rest of his life.
Right.
But someone like that can recruit those type of players like he did at Ole Miss and LSU, Auburn needs to get back to that, because even though all the attention was on the Cam Newtons of the world, of the Auburn world, it was really those fronts that made it happen.
No doubt about that, because, obviously you've got to have some playmakers, and Auburn had one of the best playmakers, if not the best playmaker that college football has seen in the last 15, 20 years. But again, without that offensive and defensive line, it just doesn't happen. And case in point, I don't think that Bo Nix stopped on his way to Oregon and drank the water of the Mississippi and became the quarterback that he is. I think that you look back at his offensive lines that he had to work behind at Auburn, not one of those there's probably not but 1 or 2 offensive linemen that's played at Auburn under Bo Nix that would even be in the top 2, in the top 2 deep at Oregon right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, because even though Bo Nix is very talented, he's athletic, he can run. I mean, you see him run 80 yards for a touchdown. But when you're caught in the pocket and there's 3 guys on you, there's not nothing you can do. So that's a good point. As far as Saturday's game, from a handicapper's perspective, there's zero value in playing a game like this. A&M's in disarray. Auburn's giving effort, but they're not a good football team. 2 bad teams doesn't always mean a pass for me. But in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if either team wins by double digits and the line is really low. So when that's the case, I'm going to pass on the side. I'm going to pass on the total as well. But again, I certainly agree that who wants it more matters a great deal in this game and games like this. But Coach, that's not easy to determine with all the variables.
No, it's not. We'll just have to wait and see this one play out. As Lane said last year, get your popcorn and we'll just watch, see what happens. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our picks of the week. We split last week 1-1. You're 5-4 on the year. I'm Blind Hog leading at 6-3 right now. My pick this week, Kansas State over Baylor. Baylor is favored by 2.5. Chris Kleiman's had some big wins since he's been at Kansas State. Oklahoma, it's almost become commonplace for him to beat Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and some of the blue bloods of the Big 12. But guess what? He's never beaten Baylor. Baylor's playing well. I've just got a hunch that Kansas State defense is going to rise up and have another stellar performance, and I think they get the win at Baylor.
Okay, Coach, I see a perfect storm Saturday at noon Eastern. I look for situations and spots all the time. And this week, there's a game that the boxes, almost all of them are checked. Box 1, team coming off a massive win. Check. Box 2, players and coaches reading and hearing about how wonderful they are. They're going to be the first 2-loss college football playoff team. Check. Their opponent coming off a disappointing loss. That's there. Arkansas. Coming off a loss to Independent Liberty. And, Coach, they lose at home, and it wasn't a fluke. They were getting physically whipped, 21-5 late in the game. Added bonus, this game tips off at noon Eastern, 11 o'clock Central. The forecast in Fayetteville, the high is in the low 40s, the lows in the upper teens to 20s. So that means likely the kickoff is going to be 30-something degrees. They're not accustomed to that in Baton Rouge. They haven't felt that weather in well over a year. You add it all up, LSU is a better team. They're power ranked higher, but they're laying 3.5 or 4. They're in a bad spot. My pick here is Arkansas. I've been playing these type situations for, all 30 years I've been doing it, and they hit about 65%. I know LSU's the better team, but they're in a bad spot.
They are in a bad spot, and as a coach, you have to coach harder this week. If you're Brian Kelly and his staff, you have to coach harder this week than any other week, because guess what? It's easy to get up for Florida. It's easy to get up for Alabama. But, Arkansas right now, again, LSU, even though those coaches are preaching, hey, don't get caught up in this hype. Don't get caught up in it. This is the battle for the boot. They play for that trophy. They're going to come to, they're going to be ready to play. It's going to be hostile. And you're right. It is going to be a tough call for LSU to be able to go in and get the win. And I don't disagree with your pick at all, but I will say this. If LSU goes in and takes care of business, that just shows me even more evidence to the type of coach and the quality of coach that Brian Kelly is.
Yeah, no, and he's equipped to handle that type of situation. He's been in that situation many times at Notre Dame, even before that when he was in the MAC. And listen, the flip side of this spot is Alabama went to Arkansas and was favored by 19 points. So obviously there's some inherent value there on LSU, because LSU is not 15 points worse than Alabama. It's just all about the situation and the spot. And again, most of the time with weather, the only thing that matters is wind. But in this case, I think the cold weather, at least LSU's they don't play in cold weather very often.
Right. All right, Mike, we appreciate your time as always. This Friday, we'll be back together Sunday morning before you start your NFL day to go over see how smart we are this week.
Yeah. Well, time will tell, right?
Time will tell. All right, Mike Bernard from OTM Sports out in Las Vegas. We'll be right back on GameDaySportsRadio.com.